So we're gonna start tonight. We want to just listen to. So let's open up the scriptures. Let's go to Exodus 20. We want to just hear the 10 Commandments again. I want to make a couple of observations, and I want to spend all our time tonight simply on the first commandment, because the first commandment isn't first because it's numerically there. It's first because it's first and most importance. At the heart of everything is the first commandment. It's the root problem of what's wrong with the world, and it's the key to beginning to live an objectively good life. So Exodus 20. The commandments are found in two places. Some of us know this, some of us don't. So it's Exodus 20 and then Deuteronomy 5. But we're going to look at Exodus 20. So here's what it says. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. That's the first line of the first commandment. Make sure we know that, because that's what sets the stage for everything. Remember, we said last week, for those of us who were able to be here, it's crucial in understanding the location of the 10 Commandments to understand why God gave the 10 Commandments and who this God is who's giving the 10 Commandments. This is a God who frees and who liberates and who saves and who rescues, contrary to the impression that we have that the commandments are about restricting or restraining freedom. They're not at all. They're actually the guide to help us to live free. In a certain sense, we could summarize the commandments to be something like this. Thou shalt not be a slave. I did not make you to be a slave. I made you to be free. Not free to do whatever you want. Free to be able to choose that which is good. Free to be able to love and to be loved, which is the only thing which will ultimately satisfy me. Okay? Make sense? All right? So the first part of the first commandment is that line, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Therefore, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son, or your daughter, your manservant or your maidservant, or your cattle, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. I'm going to make a quick comment on this only because it's in the news right now because of an archbishop's letter about banning sports on Sundays, which is getting tremendous flack from a writer in one of our local papers whose brother is a Catholic priest, saying what an idiotic decision this is. The essence of the of this commandment is not you can't do anything this day. Like you just have to sit in a corner and pray all day. The essence is the way the Catechism describes this, and we'll look at it more in detail when we get to it in a week or two. Sunday is a day of protest against the servitude of work. That's how the Catechism describes it. It's a day of rebellion, if you will, against the servitude of work. It belongs properly to God. Why? Because Jesus rose on Sunday. What's the big deal about that? He destroyed death and hell and Satan's power. He rescued you from a grip of a tyrant you could never escape from. That's the big deal about Sunday. Therefore, it's unlike any other day. It's the day that the early church used to describe as the day we cannot live without. What the archbishop's trying to do, he's trying to speak to a culture which can easily live without it. So trying to reclaim Sunday is an attempt to call us back to what it is God has done so that it can be what it's supposed to be, which is a day of rejoicing and giving thanks. You want to play pickle in the backyard with your kids? Go for it. But it's not a day to organize things which takes people away from what they could be doing as a family and with friends in their leisure. Most of us don't actually have leisure in our lives. We don't make time for it. Leisure is that which you do when you're done with everything you have to do. Most of us are like, I never get done with everything I have to do. But God commands us to rest, and the fact that we don't want to rest is a problem. So we'll get back to that more in detail later, but honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land which the Lord your God gives you. You shall not kill, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant, or his maidservant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. So let me just make a couple of quick comments, and let's just dive into the first commandment, okay? So the commandments are written, quote unquote, by the finger of God, right? So he writes the commandments into the stone. This is a poetic image, right? What's it supposed to communicate? This is direct communication from God. It is exceptionally personal. It's a letter from God, if you will, to his children, who he just rescued, to whom he's proven how much he loves them by doing what he did. Remember, 430 years in slavery? If he didn't care for them, if he didn't want to be free, he would have just left them in slavery. They're not addressed, so we don't get this in English, because we talked last week about how English is such an impoverished language. You only get one word for love. In Greek, you get 4. In Hebrew, you get 3. You miss, when we say you in English, you can't tell if it's y'all or you. In the Romance languages, it's abundantly clear, right? Anybody who speaks Italian or Spanish or French, like, you know, if this is you formal, or if it's you informal, if it's you singular, if it's you plural, right? You can't tell this. This is you personally. You, Catherine, shall not kill. You, Tori, shall not bear false witness. Not y'all shouldn't do this. You, Peter, honor your father and your mother. That's what this is, okay? So it's my name in there. And it's your name in there. So again, it's very direct address, very intimate, and very personal. They're not arbitrary. Meaning, everything God does, he does out of his love, right? You know the one reason God hates sin? So what? What's so big deal about that? Say that again? Yeah, it's bad for me. It's harmful to me. That's why he hates it. Yes, it does separate us, but that doesn't make any sense. Most people to whom we're trying to share the gospel, that doesn't make any sense to you. Big deal, I'm separated from God. We know, hopefully, after having gone through the kerygma, that you're not just separated from God, you're in the possession of an enemy from whom you can't escape on your own, who wants to destroy you. So God hates sin, for sure, but only for one reason. Because it's bad for me. Made me to be happy, infinitely happy. So everything God does out of love. So all of these then come from a God who frees, who intervenes, who loves, who speaks to us personally, who cares for us. We said you could, in a certain sense, summarize the commandments as thou shalt not be a slave. More positively, you could summarize it as thou shalt be happy. I command you to be happy. I command you to be free. Here's the problem. So in another part in the Old Testament in Deuteronomy, God says through Moses to the people, "Behold, I put before you today life and death, a blessing and a curse." Anybody know what the next line is? Choose. He tells him something. He doesn't give him a question. He says, choose that. Choose life that you may live. Right? So you wouldn't think you need to know that. Right? So God says, I put before you life and death, a blessing and a curse. Like, this should be a no-brainer, right? Why has he got to say after that, you want to choose this one? I put before you vacation on a beach or walking into a spinning propeller. I don't know. Like, there's no thought required here, right? And yet, here's where we are. This is what's happened as a result of the wound that we've received from Adam and Eve. We go, life, death. I don't know right now. I think I'm going with death. And, I mean, is it just me, or don't you do that? I don't know about you. I don't think I've ever done something wrong without knowing what I'm doing. Ever. Ever. You may not be the same, but that's how I am. Like, I'm abundantly aware of what I do when I do it. That's why when I was younger, I used to prepent. Right? Don't do this. It's not how you work, right? So like life, death, this is death. I'm going to go with death. You okay? I'll get back to you in a little while. Forgive me for what I'm about to do. Like, that's prepenting. That's not repenting. That's like repenting in advance. It doesn't work that way. Thanks be to God, I'm still alive, that God's given me a chance to like actually repent for what it was that I was prepenting for. But that's how we live, a lot of us. Like, I'm aware of what I do. And every time you make those decisions, it becomes harder to make the right decision. So we said this last week, so some of us have just gone through the waters of baptism, received the outpouring of the Holy Spirit in confirmation, like new life has been poured into us. This is extraordinary. But I got so many habits of choosing death that it's hard. I just got an email from one of our brothers and sisters who just came into the church at the vigil and just had a really hard encounter with some close friends, and feels like everything just crumbled again immediately. Because that's what happens. We have habits and we have memories. And so it's not enough just to receive. The Spirit makes it possible to overcome the habits and the memories, but it does require our cooperation and our hard work. Is this making sense? Okay, great. Okay, so let's look at the first commandment. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. That's the first commandment. It's first because it's first in importance. The problem with the world is idolatry. That is the problem. So we'll get to that in a second. Let's just try to rip it apart quick. So there's 3 parts to the commandment. First, there's one God. Only one. And you ain't him. The problem is when we rebel That's exactly what we pretend to be. God. So Jesus reduces, right, when he's asked what's the greatest commandment? Or what's the first commandment? He says the first is this. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your strength. This is the first commandment. I love it when people come into confession. They go, like, I've been in a year, so can't really think of anything to confess, actually. Yeah, just thought I should come. I'm like, well, why don't we just go through the commandments? Okay. Let's look at, Jesus makes this really simple, right? So, do you love the Lord with all your heart? All your mind? I don't do this. All your heart? All your mind? All your soul? All your strength? Oh, I guess I don't, yeah. Well, that's the only commandment that actually really matters, right? Oh, gosh, I guess I have some things to confess. So, that's this first commandment. God's supposed to be the center of the throne, or on the throne in the center of my life. When I'm in trouble, I elbow him out. He's supposed to be driving the car. I'm supposed to be in the trunk. Front seat in the right at best, right? Usually, I'm driving the car, he's in the trunk. So it's hard to give God the wheel of your whole life. It's easy to give God the wheel for those parts of your life where you don't struggle. Here, absolutely, you can have that. But we all have like one or two places in our lives where we're driving. God wants to drive. If he's not driving, I'm breaking the first commandment. And it's harmful to me. Because like Father Pierre said last week, I cannot shepherd myself. And neither can you. Sheep have zero defense mechanisms. They don't have claws. They don't have fangs. They don't have quills like a porcupine. They don't have defense mechanisms like a skunk. They have one defense, only one. Shepherds. And we're sheep. And we have, not only do we have a shepherd, we have the shepherd, right? But I got to stay close to the shepherd. Second part of the first commandment, you shall not make a graven image. This doesn't only mean that you can't make an idol of God. It means you shouldn't even try to make an image of him. So the point here is a lot more subtle than it might appear. Clearly, there's not an absolute prohibition against making images in the Old Testament. God instructs Moses to carve the cherubim, like we see in the Ark of the Covenant in our tabernacle. He instructs Moses to make a serpent and to mount it on a pole. So there's not a strict prohibition against doing this. The prohibition is really against, because we are the way we are, we're tactile. I want to see something. Right? I want to know I'm not alone. And so the irony of the Ark of the Covenant is the wings of the angels form a seat, which is the mercy seat. We talked about this when we went upstairs and walked around the sanctuary. And it's empty. And its emptiness reveals his presence. Because you and I could never come up with an image of God that would be appropriate. Okay, does that make some sense? Maybe. The only adequate image of God, right, is Jesus. That's who Jesus is. Jesus is the image of the invisible God. Third part, this is the most important, I think. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. This can also be understood to mean something a bit more profound. You can also translate this something like, you shall not let them make you bow down in front of them. I won't ask you to raise your hands, but who in here knows that you are an addict? Because we all are. To something. Some people are addicted to work. Some people are addicted to sex. Some people are addicted to alcohol. Some people are addicted to drugs. Some people are addicted to relationships. Some people are addicted to working out. Some people are addicted to whatever. We're all addicted to something. In an addiction, everything gets turned around. So I think I've shared this with you before. I had a good friend of mine who was a crack addict. So married guy, couple of kids, pretty successful. In the amount of time that I knew him, he had sold his car to go buy a hit. He had sold the furniture in his house. He had sold his clothes. And he had prostituted himself. All to get a hit which he knew could never replicate what he had once experienced. This is the ultimately demonic drug, right? You know, as a crack addict, you can never replicate again the high you had the first time you tried it. And yet you still try to replicate it. I mean, talk about satanic. So I remember sitting with him and his wife one time, and I think he had just sold the furniture in the house. And they came in, and she was livid, as you can imagine, right? And by this time, he was just broken. And I remember them sitting in, this was years and years ago. I remember him sitting in my office, and he's crying, and she's screaming at him. And finally, he just kind of like pulls his head up, and he looks at her, and he says, he kind of screams back at her, "Do you think I like this? I hate what I do. I can't get out." My brother-in-law was a crack addict. He took his life. He hung himself above a statue of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. His suicide note in part said, "Jesus, I'm so tired of fighting. You shall not let them make you bow down." Alcoholics first started to drink because they enjoyed it. Then they realized one day, I can't stop. I don't enjoy this. It's got a power over me. That's what the Lord's getting at here. God did not make you to be a slave. He did not make me to be a slave. So initially, we're the ones in control. But eventually, with addictions, we get out of control. We end up worshiping the thing, and then we get in trouble. So we hear this commandment, I think, and we often really inappropriately think this has really nothing to do with us, because we don't have little statues in our houses. So what's an idol? Tim Keller, who's a tremendous preacher, this is how he describes this. An idol is anything more important to you than God. Anything that absorbs your heart and imagination more than God. Anything you seek to give you what only God can give. So just think about that for a moment. How do you know what your idols are? What you think about all the time. And suddenly, it's not those stupid first century people who had these little statues, it's me. Anything more important to me than God? Go back to the Sunday letter that the Archbishop just wrote. So a lot of people are up in arms. Why? Because sports is their God. We build really cheap churches, and we build billion-dollar stadiums. Why? Because those are our churches. That's what we worship. Nothing wrong with sports. Love sports. It can't be a God. Why? Because it'll ruin your life. Here's how On the one hand, an idol is an empty nothing. Here's Keller again. With no real power to help us and save us. It's only a way we're trying to save ourselves. How? Money. Staying in shape. It's a losing battle, people. You know? I mean, I love to work out, and it's really important. It gets rid of stress and all that, but for those of us who like to work out, there's a line, and you know you're crossing the line when it's like, this is not just about working out to get rid of stress. This is working out because I am addicted to looking a particular way. And a lot of people are much more in the latter camp than the first, right? I remember a guy telling me in the seminary, all you're going to do is look better in a coffin. Like, I don't think that's quite true, but maybe. On the other hand, paradoxically, our idols exercise great power and control over us. They enslave us. Once we have come to believe that something will really make us happy, then we cannot help ourselves. We must follow our God. Idols demand complete dependence. They completely capture our hearts. My career, my education, my health, my whatever. Does this resonate with you all? Because it sure as heck resonates with me. Here's how another person put it. The most basic question which God continually poses to each human heart is this: has something or someone besides Jesus the Christ taken title to your heart's trust, preoccupation, loyalty, service, fear, and delight? It is a question bearing on the immediate motivation of one's behavior, thoughts, and feelings. In the Bible's conceptualization, the motivating question is the lordship question. Who or what rules my behavior? The Lord or an idol? See, to proclaim Jesus is Lord is fighting words. It means he's master. Not master in a way that enslaves us, master in the way that frees us. That's the paradox. If I want to be free, I've got to be a slave of Christ. If I don't want to be a slave of Christ, I'm enslaved to my passions, the world, and the devil. There's no options except those two, right? We said this before, it's the great quote from Fleming Rutledge. No one's captain of his own soul, master of his own fate. That's an absolute illusion. I am either living under the lordship of Jesus or I'm living under the lordship of an idol which is trying to destroy me, which ultimately is in the hands of the enemy. That's why this is so crucial. It's a great line in Paul's letter to Timothy. As for the rich in this world, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on, and then the translation I prefer is something as uncertain as wealth. You got to be kidding. This is Paul to us, because we're the rich. Comparatively in the world, right? Everybody in here. If for no other reason than you have an education. Right? So tell the wealthy, do not put your trust in something as uncertain as money. Isn't that where we put like all of our certainty? For most of us, for real? That's where it all rests. But it can go like that. Market crashes, banks fall apart. It can all go. Don't put your trust in something that uncertain. There's a story of Alexander the Great that he wanted to be buried with his hand outside his sarcophagus. Because he wanted to reveal to everybody, look, I am taking nothing with me. That's life. Don't put your trust in something like that. Put your trust in the one who does not disappoint, the one who frees, the one who fights, the one who saves, the one who rescues, the one who loves, the one who died for you, the one who's got the keys of the kingdom in his hand, who's trampled over Hades and over Satan. That's where you want to put your trust. No one else. There's a couple that I'm thinking of who have a severely impaired child, and it's cost them everything financially. And I remember when they were beginning to go through this, they were at a Bible study that I happened to be at, and the mom is a very warm, friendly person, but would often be very quiet at Bible study. And so when she spoke, like, everybody listened. And I remember, so everybody was aware of what was going on in her family at the time, because it was becoming devastating on lots of levels. Sleepless nights, concerned about whether their child was going to live. I think the hospital bill came the first time that they were there. It was something like $5 million, and they just laughed and ripped it up. Like, what am I going to do with this, right? And so she started to speak, and she just said, back when we had money. And then she went on to describe how their family would love to go on vacations and buy all sorts of stuff and go to nice places. And she says, and life was good, but we were at it with each other at times and whatnot. She goes, but now we don't have anything. We just have each other. And reality, we've never been happier. All we do is fight over who gets to hold so-and-so. We never go out. We never go on vacations. But we're happier than we've ever been. And every single woman in that room, it was a women's Bible study, was looking at her as if to say, I want what you have. I just don't want to get it the way you got it. But she was so happy. Don't put your trust in something as uncertain as wealth. Here's Keller again. A counterfeit God, an idol, is anything so central and essential to your life that should you lose it, your life would feel hardly worth living. Tragically, for most of us, faith is not in that list. That means I have an idol. If the first thing that I'm thinking of there isn't my relationship with God, that's why the martyrs lose their lives. They don't want to die. That's not what they want. They're not masochists. They just can't live. If you're telling me I can't live and say I love God, well, then I guess you're taking my life, because that's my life. Everything else is nothing. That's my life. So deny him, be disloyal to him, pretend he hasn't rescued me, pretend I don't know everything to him? I can't do that. So shoot, hack away, I guess. But for a lot of us, it's a relationship. Could be a home. Could be our nest egg. Could be oftentimes it's our health. An idol is anything more fundamental to God than God to your happiness, your meaning in life, and your identity. It's not so much wanting bad things as it is turning good things into ultimate things. That's what most of us do, I think. I don't know about you. Like, I love Lent. One of the reasons I love Lent, I quite honestly do much better at nothing than moderation. Lent comes, like, don't drink. There you go. Nothing, or don't eat between meals. Nothing. But the challenge of learning how to live a moderate life, that's hard for most of us. Like, living in the world and not of the world, that's hard. It's easier to just live like not in the world. But we can't do that. We're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to live in the world, just not of it. This is really hard to do. That's why the gift of the Spirit is so essential in our lives, because he gives us the power to be able to do this. But again, some of us are overcoming decades of memories and habits to do that. So we take good things, turn them into ultimate things. I love Michigan football. It's been brutal for a long time. I mean, people think I'm joking about this. This is not funny for me. It's not enjoyable for me. I hate the fact that a game can't be a game. Like, that's pathetic. Like, why can't you just enjoy a game? Why does an outcome of a game determine whether or not we're going to be kind to one another or whether I'm going to sleep in peace? I remember Michigan lost to somebody one time. This was years ago. And I remember I'm a priest at this time. I'm lying in my bed. I think it was Texas in the Rose Bowl. It was Texas in the Rose Bowl. Not that I would remember. I'm lying in my bed and I am so ticked. I remember saying to myself, I hope I didn't do this out loud, but I at least said it in my head. You remember the USC Rose Bowl game? Remember when they said Charles White didn't fumble? You're over that, right? That was like 30 years before. Like, that's how I had to get myself to just not worry about it. But this is true for countless people, right? These are addictions we're talking about. That's an addiction. It's turned a good into an ultimate thing, and it's ruined the ability to enjoy the good. And God made everything that's good, right? Everything that is good. It's just so hard for us because what he makes is so good not to make them into idols. When we do, they crush us. This means anything can become an idol. Good things, career, family, achievement, independence, a political cause, material possessions, certain people and dependence upon you, power, influence, physical attractiveness, romance, human approval, financial security, your place in a particular social circle or institution. That book, by the way, is a phenomenal book, Counterfeit Gods. Once we have come to believe that something will really make us happy, then we cannot help ourselves. We must follow our God. They demand complete dependence, and they completely capture our hearts. So, why don't we do this? Let's just take some time at table and reflect on this. So, what strikes us in this, if you got, by this time, maybe we've got the vulnerability and the trust with one another to be able to share some things, but what is it that jumps out at you, both in what we're reflecting on, and then as the Lord just kind of speaks to you as we reflect on it together about idolatry? And what can we do to escape this in our lives, right? What's the solution to idolatry? I think it's two things. Trusting, trusting God. Trusting in God, abstaining from the idol. Although, good point. Fulton Sheen would always say, as Father Dave would say, here's the challenge. And if something's in me, it's not enough to just take it out. Something has to go in the place. So nature abhors a vacuum. I got to fill it with something. So you're right. I got to get rid of the worship of that. I got to replace it with worship. The worship of God. Everybody here worships. There isn't anybody who doesn't worship. It's just a question of what we worship. Some people worship money. Some people worship politics. Some people worship individuals. Some people worship our children. Some people worship our spouse, our best friend. We worship everything, right? So we all worship. All those things will end up controlling us because they're not the right object. The right object, subject, is God. So I think at least as an initial answer, the solution to idolatry is faith. Maybe it's three things. Repent, acknowledge it, repent, put your trust in God, and then worship, right? So look at Romans 1. So Paul says this, ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature, God's, namely his eternal power and deity, has been clearly perceived in the things that have been made. So they, this is the pagans, are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their senseless minds were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man or birds or animals or reptiles. Therefore, God handed them over. See, this is why idolatry is the root problem. We know from our reason that nothing comes from nothing. I may not be able to get to the answer that the one who created everything that is a God who loves, whose Father, who sent his Son to become man for me and die and rescue me from the power of Satan and death and sin and hell. But I can know from reason that the universe did not create itself. We are without excuse in that regard. When we deny that, when we do not give God, acknowledge him as the one who is the author of everything that is, and worship him as he deserves, what happens is my mind gets darkened, and then I'm handed over to these powers who tyrannize me. When I walk away from God on purpose, I'm not just walking into neutral zone land. I'm walking into Mordor, if you know the Lord of the Rings. I'm walking into darkness. Okay? So, again and again, all throughout this experience of becoming Catholic, we've been trying to say this is just about getting some new information and some data. It's about trying to live an entirely new way of life, right? So, Kerygma's created, captured, rescued, response. What we're talking about right now, this is the response, right? What's the response that God's calling from me? Worship him. Take time to acknowledge and to discover, ask him to show me what are the idols in my life. What are the things I turn to? Where do I put my trust? And maybe as we're sitting at a table, as we just reflect on these things, we can just share, this has been helpful for me. This used to be an idol for me. This is how I got to where I am now with freedom, or how I'm trying to get to where I'm going with freedom. Hopefully we all have experience of this. Okay? So what strikes me concretely at the table? What strikes me in this? Do I think, does this make sense to me? What can we collectively do to help each other turn from idols to the living God and grow in freedom and put our trust in the only one who's certain? How about we do that?